The time has come for me to reveal all the secrets of the Gap from Starfinder. Okay, let's just open this up and see what all they have. What? Oh no. Oh no, every page in this book is blank? And I can't remember any of the notes I took. What am I gonna do? Okay, Mark, don't panic, just think. You just need another video you can record for the channel. I've got it. Today, I'm going to give you 5 reasons that you should check out Starfinder 2e that have nothing to do with compatibility with Pathfinder 2e on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller that is prepared to reject your reality and substitute my own. Witchworkers for the win. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to 5 reasons that you should check out Starfinder 2e that aren't really related to Pathfinder 2e or the fact that these games are intended to be compatible. So, not too long ago, I got back from Gen Con, fantastic event, and at Gen Con 2025, Paizo dropped the highly anticipated Starfinder 2nd Edition. A lot of people, myself included, were pretty hyped for this game, and while I was there, I was able to pick up physical copies of both the Starfinder Player Core and the previously released Starfinder Galaxy Guide. Now, thanks to some early access PDFs that Paizo sent me, I've actually done reviews of both of those products already for this channel, and if you want to check out my thoughts on those books in specific, I'll throw some links to the reviews down in the video description so you can go check those out. But today, what I wanted to talk about was why Starfinder 2e is such an exciting game, and why it is a game to be excited about beyond just its relationship to Pathfinder 2e. There has been a lot of buzz around Starfinder 2e. One of the big selling points of the system is that Paizo deliberately made Pathfinder 2e and Starfinder 2e into compatible games, meaning that you can cross over between them. And a lot of the conversation that I've seen around Starfinder 2e has really focused on that fact, but I'm afraid that in that discussion, we've kind of lost sight of some of what makes Starfinder 2e such a unique and standout game on its own. So the TLDW for today's video is this: I want to give you 5 reasons that you should check out Starfinder 2e that really aren't related to Pathfinder 2e. My summary is pretty simple here. I was a big fan of Starfinder 1st Edition, and one of the big reasons I loved that game was it was such a creative game. You could tell that Paizo gave its authors a lot of creative freedom, a lot of liberty to really explore crazy and wild ideas and try new things and just do stuff because it was interesting. I really loved that about Starfinder 1e. Sometimes Starfinder 1e was a mechanical mess, I'm not gonna lie, but just the creative expression of the 1st edition of Starfinder was so much fun to see that when Paizo announced the 2nd edition of the game, I was simultaneously both excited and worried. Updating the mechanics of Starfinder 2e to build off of the base chassis of Pathfinder 2e's mechanics, I was ready for that. I think that is a very solid improvement to the game, no questions asked, but one of my big concerns was whether or not Paizo would keep that creative impulse that really made Starfinder 1E such a fun game for me. And I'm not going to bury the lead here, Paizo has. I can already tell, even though we're only 2 books deep in this game, that Paizo has really kept the creative juices flowing for Starfinder, and you can tell that this is very much a game where the writers, the designers, are having fun with the game that they're making. So, on the specific points I'm going to talk about today, Paizo's use of uncommon options, the interesting things they do with equipments, their genre-savvy mechanics, especially the classes, and some of the narrative elements like the gap and the absolutely amazing factions that Paizo has designed, all of those things really just come back to this single point. Starfinder is a game that has always felt like there was a lot of creativity and passion behind the game, and you can tell that Starfinder 2E is continuing with that creativity and with that passion. So, join me today for a discussion of 5 reasons that I think Starfinder 2E is a standout TTRPG, and with all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, before I dive into the 5 reasons I'm going to give in this video, I do want to talk about a couple of honorable mentions of things that I think make Starfinder 2E a standout TTRPG, and I'll go ahead and be honest, one of them is what I've already mentioned, the fact that Starfinder 2E is designed to be cross-compatible with Pathfinder 2E. That is, if we are being honest, a selling point of this game. The fact that Paizo deliberately built these games in such a way that you can cross them over is something that opens up options at the gaming table. It opens up unique story ideas, unique story opportunities, and it allows both games to have a wider variety of options that naturally build on themselves. I do think it is an honorable mention to say that compatibility between Starfinder 2E and Pathfinder 2E is a wonderful thing. In fact, at Gen Con, I ran a Starfinder Pathfinder one-shot where my players could build characters from either system, and then I made them run their characters through Jurassic Park and fight a Magus Velociraptor named Clever Girl. It was a ton of fun and it worked well. I'm not here to knock on the people who are celebrating the fact that these 2 games cross over well. That is truly a good thing. My goal instead is to focus in on Starfinder itself and the things that I think Starfinder does really, really well that are worth celebrating, things that I think occasionally get glossed over when we do the compatibility discussions. Also, my other honorable mention is Skittermanders, because if you're a fan of this channel, you know that I love Skittermanders, and I could make this entire video about Skittermanders if you allowed me, so for the sake of your sanity, we'll just say that Skittermanders are an honorable mention. But let's go ahead and dive into the list proper, and in setting up this list, I really want to emphasize that every point I'm making here goes back to a single idea. I feel like Starfinder 2E, you can already tell, is a very creative game. This is a game that feels like the authors and designers are given the leeway to really play with what is available, to really explore unique and interesting ideas and options, and honestly, a lot of that comes from the setting itself. I might be chasing a bit of a rabbit here, but I've said many times on this channel that I think Paizo has some of the best setting writers in the entire industry, and as good as I think the world of Golarion may be for Pathfinder, I really think the talent of the setting writers is on display in full force in the Starfinder setting. Starfinder, I really think, sets the standard of what it means to have good setting writing for a TTRPG. Paizo consistently brings a lot of great things to the fore, and every point I'm about to make really boils down to the fact that Paizo has just taken this setting of Starfinder and used it in unique and interesting mechanical and narrative ways. In essence, this is a game where Paizo has taken the setting and found all the really good points about the setting and put them to effective use. A good example of this is something that I noticed reading the backgrounds in the Starfinder player core, and that is, I noticed that Paizo included uncommon backgrounds in Starfinder player core. That's the first major chapter of the book. Pathfinder and Starfinder use a rarity system to describe how common or uncommon certain things might be inside of the game. You have common, uncommon, rare, and unique, and those traits aren't meant to be a measure of power level, but they are meant to be a measure of how accessible those things might be in a given setting. And in Pathfinder, understandably, there are a lot of things that are uncommon, rare, or unique that might not be readily available to most players or player characters, and understandably so. Pathfinder is primarily intended to be a fantasy game, so classes like the Gunslinger, Inventor, and Exemplar are not necessarily going to be immediately appropriate for every game that someone might run using Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Some game masters are perfectly comfortable with those options, myself included, but some game masters might prefer to tell stories that don't necessarily include those options, so Paizo uses those tags to kind of delineate these things are relatively common in the world, these things less so. And in the Pathfinder player core, you are presented with a large list of common options, and most of the options in Pathfinder typically fall under that common heading, with a few uncommon, rare, and even unique options sprinkled through some of the other books in the game. But in Starfinder, in the player core, the first book that's really released for players to use, in the first major chapter, they're dropping uncommon options. One of the backgrounds is called Cyberborn, and it allows you to start with a cybernetic upgrade installed in your body. And that's a good thing. I know this may seem like I am fixating on something really, really small, but the fact that Paizo brings uncommon options to the table right from the word go, that sets a narrative tone for Starfinder that I think is very important and very much worth celebrating. One of the big selling points of a space opera, sci-fantasy, futuristic setting is the idea that you have an entire galaxy to explore. It's not just a town, it's not just a region, it's not just a continent, it's not just a world at your fingertips, but it is an entire galaxy laid out before you and your players, and you have the opportunity to go anywhere. And the idea that uncommon options are presented in the very first book sets a tone for the game that says, be prepared to encounter uncommon things. And by extension, be prepared to encounter rare things. Be prepared to encounter things that you might not see on a normal daily basis. The simple act of putting uncommon options into the very first book and presenting those as things that players might want to use, that is a very powerful thing that sets the stage for the kind of stories that you can tell in Starfinder. I am already the kind of storyteller who prefers to throw just about every option imaginable into the pile and say, have fun to my players. I already tend to prefer games like that anyways, but Paizo's decision to do this speaks to a certain type of narrative expectation that really sets Starfinder apart from Pathfinder. Now, as with Pathfinder, when it comes to uncommon, rare, and unique options, you still need to talk to your game master if you want to use one of the uncommon options presented for Starfinder. You still need to have that discussion with your GM, but just the fact that those options are put out there, that changes the conversation, and that's something that, in terms of how Pathfinder and Starfinder started out, Starfinder is clearly doing better at. Paizo has set the expectation that the uncommon is going to show up in this game, and I'm excited to see what future offerings come as a result. The second thing that I want to talk about that Starfinder is doing really well, Starfinder's equipment is off to a much more interesting start than Pathfinder's equipment. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Pathfinder has terrible equipment. There's actually a lot of diversity and a lot of interesting options and items inside of Pathfinder 2e. But I will say, if you take Pathfinder and Starfinder and set them side by side, it sort of makes sense that Starfinder should be more interesting in terms of the equipment just from the setting alone. Standard stock fantasy world and the kinds of things that you could expect in a medieval style fantasy setting, the equipment you expect to see there is certainly interesting, but when you compare that to the kind of equipment you expect to see in a futuristic space opera where you can get on starships and literally explore the stars, yeah, it makes sense. Starfinder should be a game where the equipment is a lot more interesting and varied, and you can already tell Starfinder is off to that start. And I think the clearest expression of this is in how Starfinder and Pathfinder handle armor. Armor in Pathfinder 2e, I'm just going to be honest, is kind of boring. It's functional, and when you get up to higher levels, you can get interesting runes and different things to add to your armor. Don't get me wrong, it's not like the armor in Pathfinder 2e is bad, it's not a selling point of the game. I don't think I've seen any videos really bragging on how incredible armor is used inside of Pathfinder 2e. Shields maybe, armor, let's go ahead and admit, not the case. But in Starfinder 2e, you almost immediately have a noticeable difference because the armor in Starfinder 2e potentially comes with the option for upgrades. Now, from a game design standpoint, upgrades are not necessarily that unique. The upgrade system in Starfinder 2e fills some of the same game design slots that potency and property runes serve in Pathfinder 2e. Upgrades and runes, they kind of do the same thing. But what makes it more interesting in Starfinder is, number one, upgrades are available essentially from the word go. You can find upgrades for a lot of your equipment at level 1, meaning that stock standard equipment that just came off the shelf is not something that you have to stick to at low levels. Even in very early play in Starfinder 2e, your characters can really be adjusting their gear to match what they want to accomplish inside of the game. Now, as I mentioned, runes in Pathfinder 2e allow you to modify gear as well, but runes come into play a lot later, and in Pathfinder 2e, armor runes come into play a lot later. The early accessibility of upgrades really sets Starfinder equipment, and especially Starfinder armor, apart right from the word go, but there's a little bit of a nuance here. It also allows Starfinder to design with upgrades in mind from the word go. In Pathfinder, armor has a few different variables, but really when you're choosing armor, it boils down to two variables. One is the item bonus to AC, and the second is your max dexterity bonus. I would say 95% of the time, when people choose armor in Pathfinder 2e, those are the two stats that they're looking at, and the other attributes of armor in Pathfinder 2e, they're part of the package, but they don't really factor into the decisions that people make. Go over to Starfinder 2e, and you will quickly notice there's actually 3 areas of design that come into play. Again, you have the item bonus to AC, again you have the maximum dexterity, but you also have upgrade slots. And the fact that armor now has these 3 variables that you can balance against gives a lot more creative space inside of the game. Do you want armor that is the most protective? Do you want armor that is the most flexible? Or do you want armor that is the most customizable? That 3-point axis of decision for players, I think, instantly sells Starfinder equipment so much better than what is presented in Pathfinder 2e. And again, it may seem like I'm fixating on a very narrow thing, but I want you to see the larger point that I'm illustrating with this. Paizo, by opening up some variability in how armor works through the upgrade system, has made armor as equipment much more interesting and has made the decision much more engaging, and that interesting equipment design carries across the system. The Starfinder player core already has some interesting choices to make when it comes to equipment, and the tech book that's going to have the Technomancer and the Mechanic, that's not even out yet. So Paizo still has a lot of stuff they haven't even given us yet. Seriously, the equipment in this game is interesting, and it's already something I greatly enjoy about Starfinder 2e. Next up, for item number 3, I want to talk about the classes in Starfinder 2e, and how they show that Paizo has some serious genre savvy in how they designed this game. There are 6 base classes to be found in Starfinder 2e, and I do plan to visit them all in future videos on this channel. You have the Envoy, the Operative, the Soldier, the Mystic, but 2 classes in particular really jump out to me in this game for how well Paizo embraces the narrative of a space opera game, and that is the Solarian and the Witchwarper. Now, both of these classes existed in Starfinder 1st Edition and have been updated to 2e. Neither of these classes are new in sense of the setting, but I want to highlight them because they show that Paizo is really good at understanding the genre of story that they are telling. The elevator pitch for the Solarian is pretty simple. The Solarian has managed to channel the power of the stars, whether it's the raw fire of a sun blasting its heat out into space, or the crushing power of a black hole. The Solarian has commanded the forces of gravity and heat that shape the universe itself, and they have the ability to create fiery or gravity weapons that reflect the incredible power that shapes the universe. Without touching a single mechanic of the Solarian class, I just want to point out that is a pure flavor win. If you are doing space opera, sci-fantasy storytelling, that is the exact kind of thing you would expect to see in this sort of setting, and Paizo has delivered just a perfect on-brand class. And here's the thing, Solarian is a Paizo exclusive. I have not seen a class like Solarian in any other science fiction, space, fantasy style game. This is something that Paizo created on their own. They recognized what is an obvious theme of the setting and said, we gotta run with this. And now that Paizo has provided me with the Solarian, when I see settings that don't include this, I actually feel a bit disappointed. And the same goes for the Witchwarper. Again, the selling point of the Witchwarper is pretty straightforward. You are someone who is unmoored from reality in one fashion or another, and you have the ability to twist reality to your benefit. Maybe you are out of time, maybe you're from an alternate reality, or maybe you just have some weird perception on this reality, but in one way or another, you have the ability to warp events in your vicinity to your own advantage. And for a science fiction, especially a science fantasy setting, how was that not a thing before? I've seen ideas like this in other games, but nothing to the extent that Paizo created when they released the Witchwarper. The Witchwarper is one of the most on-brand, genre-savvy class creations I have ever seen in a TTRPG, and again, this is a Paizo exclusive. Nobody else has really done this. Nobody else has really done this, or at the very least, nobody else has really done this to nearly the same scale and effectiveness that Paizo has. Paizo took something that is such an obvious piece of these kinds of stories and said, how can we make this an enjoyable, exciting part of the game? The Solarian and the Witchwarper both capture something that I think is integral to understanding why Starfinder is such a great game. Paizo has some seriously genre-savvy authors. They understand the setting, they understand the strengths of the setting, and they know how to use those strengths to tell really good stories. And for what it's worth, I'm skipping over 4 other really great classes. Like, I'm not going to pretend that the Mystic, Envoy, Operative, and Soldier are not also great fits for a space opera or science fantasy setting. Those 4 classes also perfect for the kinds of stories you expect to be able to tell. Of course, if you can't tell by this point in the video, I'm really leaning into the incredible narrative potential that Starfinder 2e offers. So for my last 2 points, I want to talk about some of the narrative elements of Starfinder 2e that I find particularly compelling and interesting. Are these the only good narrative elements? Definitely no. There is a ton of great stuff that Paizo has offered as part of Starfinder, but I do want to highlight 2 things that I think are especially engaging for storytellers and players, and the first one is the gap. For those who are unaware, the Gap is a major narrative event in the history of the Starfinder universe that serves to both connect Starfinder to Pathfinder and also cleanly break the games so that they are not wholly reliant on each other. You see, the Gap is a period in Starfinder's history where nobody remembers the history. Collectively, across the whole of the Starfinder setting, every single society, every single planet has a period of their history not too long ago where the records all disappear. It's as if society just collectively woke up in process with no clear or distinct understanding of how they got where they were or what's going on. Now, blank spaces in memory is already a great narrative tool, but the fact that Paizo has the absurdity to do this across an entire galaxy, that alone is something worth celebrating. Bravo, Paizo, I love this. From a purely game design point, the Gap does a few important things. It allows Pathfinder and Starfinder to occur in the same universe, it allows them to be part of the same universe, but it also allows you to cleanly break the 2 games apart so that you don't have to feel like you are dependent on both games if you want to run either of the games. If you want to run Starfinder and completely ignore the history of Pathfinder, you can do that. Why? Nobody remembers it anyways. And by the same token, if you are playing Pathfinder, are you obligated to follow a certain path because that's what's going to happen in the future in Starfinder? No, you aren't. There is this giant gap in history that very cleanly cuts the narrative tie between the 2. It builds a universe that is connected, but leaves those connections mysterious enough that you are not beholden to them. So, from a game design perspective, the Gap is pretty smart, but it's also really good from just a storytelling perspective. As I mentioned a moment ago, gaps in memory are a very common, well-known, often well-regarded narrative tool. How many characters in fiction are dealing with some kind of amnesia, some kind of missing memory that they're trying to figure out what really happened, what's going on? A gap in your memory can be an entire driver, an entire motivator for a story. Don't believe me? Gatewalkers in Pathfinder 2e. That's literally how that story starts. By writing this event called the Gap into their setting, Paizo has given a powerful narrative tool to storytellers and players that you can very easily play around with, and Paizo has been very deliberate about saying that the effects of the Gap are not universally consistent. That's another fun detail. Paizo has noted that different societies, different planets, kind of woke up from the Gap at different times or in different ways. So you could have one planet that has 20 years of missing history, and the next society over, they actually know what happened on their world for those 20 years. The Gap ended a little sooner for them. That creates a lot of narrative flexibility for storytellers and players, And another narrative thing that Starfinder does with the gap is it allows the setting to start in media res, or in the middle of the action. The universe essentially comes into play with people already in their roles, with societies already functioning a certain way, but not really remembering how or why these things happened, which is fertile ground for all kinds of stories. Seriously, the narrative potential of the gap could fuel hundreds of games and still leave plenty of stories left untold. So I've probably been rambling on a bit too long at this point, so let me just say, the gap is absolutely a brilliant narrative device and something that I think makes Starfinder an incredible setting. The last thing that I want to talk about today is the amazing faction design in Starfinder 2e. And again, this is one of those things where I could cover a lot of different ground here. The Starfinder Galaxy Guide includes some details on factions like Abator Corps, the Free Captains, the Knights of Golarion, the Hell Knights, the Xeno Wardens, and that's just a small list of factions that exist inside of the Starfinder setting. It says nothing about larger factions like the Pact Worlds or the Veskarium or the Aslanti Star Empire or the Swarm. We had an entire adventure path in Starfinder 1st Edition about the Swarm, and honestly, they're out there still doing some stuff. The creative team at Paizo has done a really good job creating a lot of large and small factions inside of the Starfinder setting that players can ally with, that they can work for or against, and that they can interact with to tell some truly amazing tales. One of my personal favorites is Abator Corps. Yes, I know most people say Abadar Corps, but I prefer Abator Corps, so that's what you're getting for this video. Abator Corps is the futuristic interpretation of the Church of Abator that exists on Golarion. Abator on Golarion was the god of wealth and merchants and society, and his church oversaw those things on the world of Golarion. Well, fast forward to the future, and the Church of Abator has morphed into a new form where instead of a formal church, they're now a religious corporation. There are some very interesting storytelling ideas tied up in that. I absolutely love it. I can't dig into all of it here, but as someone who works as a member of the clergy, Paizo did some intelligent storytelling on that one. I'll just go ahead and say it. You can spend a ton of time diving into the different factions in the Starfinder setting and find all sorts of exciting and interesting options to help storytellers build stories and player characters build players inside of this setting. As part of the launch of Starfinder 2e, we have the Church of the Newborn that has just appeared after the planet of Octurn hatched. Yes, that was a real sentence. Yes, that is a real thing. And at the same time, the Aslanti Star Empire and the Veskarium are actively at war with each other, and we already know that that war is going to have some major influence on the future of the Starfinder setting. Large scale, small scale, it doesn't matter. Paizo has brought a ton of interesting factions to the Starfinder setting, and there's just a lot of great ideas that you can use to build a lot of interesting characters inside of this game. But at this point, I'm in danger of rambling a little too long on this subject, so the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about Starfinder 2e, and what do you think makes this game stand out as a TTRPG? Again, I love the fact that Starfinder and Pathfinder are compatible games. I have no complaints about that, but I also think Starfinder has some truly unique strengths that allow it to stand entirely on its own. So, what do you think those strengths are? Do you agree with my list? Or do you think that there are other strengths in this game that really deserve a mention? Jump down to the comments section, share your thoughts. I look forward to seeing what you have to say. And while you're doing that, don't forget to do all the other stuff that helps support the channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of those links will be in the video description below. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.